Strap in, Spookoplathoners, because today I'm going to be recommending you between 55 and 60 books based on the Spookoplathon prompts. So today I'm going to be recommending 3 books for almost every prompt on the 2023 Spookoplathon board. If you don't know what this is a spooky season variation on the Bookoplathon, which is a readathon that I host every year based on my TBR game Bookopoly, which is based on Monopoly, but instead of rolling to buy properties, you roll to get reading prompts. I know, that's a lot, but I will link the announcement video up here in case you guys want to check it out and join us. You do still have time. It's super simple and very much a play at your own speed kind of readathon. But for those of you that know what's going on, I know that I always say every year that all of the prompts are open to interpretation, and I like to give you some examples in the guide of ways that you can interpret some of the spaces on the board. And last year I did recommend like 1 book per space for the majority of the spaces, but because some of these spooky season prompts are a little bit more niche and I have multiple ways of interpreting some of them, I wanted to give you more than 1 recommendation per prompt so you could see some of the ways that you could interpret the prompt, potentially based on what it seems like on face value. So like I said, if you don't know what's going on here, please do check out the announcement, and because this is kind of like a follow-up video to that. Because I am recommending 3 books per prompt, I'm not going to be doing a whole this is what this book is about, this is what I thought of it. Some of these books I haven't read, they're on my TBR. Some of them I don't even own, I just know that they'd be really good for the prompt, so I'm going to mention them. So as that kind of implies, the way that I'm recommending these books is not based on my enjoyment on whether I would recommend them as a book, it's based on how well they fit the prompt. Now the reason why this is for almost every space on this board, there are quite a few spaces that very much depend on you and your reading and your book collection, and I can't really recommend a book for those prompts because it is very individual to the player. And what you'll see as we go throughout this recommendations video is that I've tried to give you either a range of genres for each prompt, so like not recommending 3 fantasy books for 1 prompt, or I've tried to give you a recommendation for more than 1 interpretation of the prompt. So starting with the beginning of the board, I can't recommend anything for the first 4 spaces. We have Go, which is randomize your TBR. I don't know what's on your TBR. We have Lowest Rated, which is very much dependent on what you have on your Goodreads TBR shelf or whichever like book tracking website you use. And then it is a book that is under 300 pages. And that one I feel is pretty self-explanatory and you won't need my help with. And then the 4th prompt on the board, or 5th I guess if we're starting at Go, is TBR Vet, which is once again like I don't know how long you've had the books that you have. So the first prompt that I can recommend you a book for is the first of the train stations, which is also the first of our Taylor Swift prompts, and that one is They Are Burning All the Witches Even If You Aren't One. And the prompt for this is to read a book that features witches, witchcraft. You could actually read like a non-fiction on the Salem witch trials if you wanted, the occult or rituals or something like that. So my first recommendation for you guys is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This one is an adult paranormal romance with a bit of historical fiction mixed in as well, and also a little bit of academia. This one is essentially Twilight for adults, and it has witches in the title, but in terms of characters we have like witches, demons and vampires in here. My second recommendation for this prompt is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This one is an adult, I don't know if it's like a thriller or a horror, but it has some dark academia in here as well. And this one is following a character at Yale. Yes, I always get confused whether it's Yale or Harvard. And her job is essentially to police the secret societies of Yale, which are all practicing the occult. So we have a lot of things like rituals and the occult in this one. My third recommendation is one of my favorite witchy reads, which is perfect for this prompt, and that is The Ravens by Cass Morgan and Danielle Page. And this is following a sorority of witches known as the Ravens. The first set of property spaces we have are the spooky colors. So for these ones, you are looking for books where the cover is majorly the color that you've landed on. I always really struggle to describe that, and it's like literally one of the most simple prompts on the board. But the first color we have is orange, so I essentially just have 3 orange books to show you. The first one is How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days by K.M. Jackson. This one is an adult contemporary rom-com. I actually found orange books quite hard to find if I'm being honest, but I have an alternative way of fulfilling the prompt, and that is a manga called Orange by Ichigo Takano. This one is a like YA contemporary manga about a friendship group, and it deals a lot with mental health. This would also fit for the Mary Shelley prompt if you don't want to read an actual sci-fi, because it is a contemporary with a sci-fi twist, as the main character receives a letter from her future self telling her that if she doesn't do something about a boy who's just moved into their class, by the time she reaches the age where the letter has come from, that boy won't be around anymore. And then my last orange recommendation is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Obviously the majority of this is black, but the most dominant colour I would say is orange. It's also like the focal point of this cover, and this is about a vampire that moves into a small town, so I feel like it would be a really good spooky season read. For green, the first one I have is Masters of Death by Olivia Blake. This one could also be good for the spooky prompt because it has like a skeleton on the cover. This one is a very bizarre, like zany paranormal jaunt, I would say. It's a really good time. I really enjoyed this one, and it has a ton of paranormal creatures, including like I think there's vampires, a demon, a ghost, the godson of death. Death himself is a character. There's also archangels and stuff as well, so pretty much any creature that exists is in here. I could not do green recommendations without mentioning Jade City by Fonda Lee. This one is an adult urban fantasy about two warring gangs who are trying to control the majority of the jade on the island where they're from, which is a powerful drug that enhances magical abilities. It essentially gives people the same abilities that they have like in Mistborn when they ingest metal. And as well as this generally being green, jade is a shade of green, which is in the title, so that's also a way that you can interpret the prompt. And the last green one I have is In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune, which could also fill the prompt Are We Out of the Woods Yet, which is to read a book with trees on the cover. I'm under the assumption, I haven't read this yet, but I feel like TJ Klune writes cozy fantasy but with some more poignant topics embedded in there. And this one is about a man who lives with robots in the woods, I think, and they salvage an android that alerts the authorities to where they're living, and one of the characters is taken away and everybody has to find them. For purple, if you have an active or have had an active Fairy Loot subscription, I feel like you're not going to struggle with this prompt. But the first one I have is the Illumicrate edition of This Woven Kingdom by Tahara Murphy, which is probably the most purple book that I own, but I actually could not tell you anything that this one is about, so it's a good job that that's not the main focus of this recommendation video, right? This one is a cozy read that I think would be perfect for fall, which is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I feel like this one, I don't know without reading it, but I feel like this could also count for spoopy, and it does also have trees on the cover, so it would count for Are We Out of the Woods Yet as well. And this one is an adult, I think, cozy fantasy about a woman that is sent to teach 3 young witches. And then the last one I have is a YA fantasy that wants its Fairy Loot edition. See, I told you. And once again, I know nothing about this one, but that one is Defy the Night by Bridget Kemmerer, which is very purple and also has a purple sprayed edge. So at the corner we have feed scroll. I don't know what's on your feed right now, so I can't recommend for that. But then we have the pink spaces, and these are the spoopy, spooky and stabby spaces. So spoopy, if you don't know what that is, it is something that like embodies spooky season without having anything scary in it. So the first recommendation I have for this is a comic that I've seen around called Sheets. I don't know the plot of this, but I know it's a very cute comic that features a ghost, and there's at least one sequel to this as well. When I wrote this down, this is the thing that like immediately came to mind for me. One of the ways that you can interpret the spoopy prompt is to read like a spooky middle grade, and I do have a recommendation for that, which is Malamander by Thomas Taylor, which is one that I've actually read. This series is about a boy who works at the lost and found of a hotel, and a girl turns up, and together they try to uncover the secret of the Malamander, which is like a urban legend that exists in this seaside town that the main characters are in, and then each book in this series has a different like legend or monster in it. And if you're more of a romance reader, you could read something like The X by Erin Sterling, which is pretty much a contemporary romance featuring a witch that lives in this town that's very reminiscent of Halloween Town, and she curses her ex-boyfriend with a Bath and Body Works candle, and when he comes back into town and things start to go wrong, she has to pretty much put that to rights before everything implodes. The spooky square is very, very vague considering the theming of this board as a whole, so you can interpret this any way you would like to. So I have a couple of books here that scream spooky to me in some way. The first one is Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. I haven't read this, but I adore the movie to this. It's one of my favorite movies. And this is following two vampires, Lestat and Louis, as Louis is giving an interview about like how he was turned and his life with Lestat. It is super atmospheric. I think, don't quote me on this, I think that this might count as gothic, which would work for the Daphne du Maurier prompt as well. It's also very campy, like it's very queer without explicitly being queer, or the movie is at least. I don't know if the book is explicitly queer. We also have a horror, which is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This one is about a girl whose best friend is possessed. I think they go swimming in a lake. The girl goes missing for a couple of hours, and when she comes back, like nothing's quite right with her. This is set in the 80s, which is my favorite thing about it, and I love how all Grady Hendrix books have something a little bit quirky about them, the setting of this being the thing for My Best Friend's Exorcism. And then the other one I have is a sci-fi horror, which would also be perfect for the Mary Shelley prompt, which is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. This is about the 12th expedition into an area called Area X. Area X is the result of like an environmental disaster, and scientists have been trying to get to the bottom of it for quite some time, but something terrible happens to every expedition that gets sent in. Like one ended in mass suicide, in one all of them turned mad and started shooting each other, and this one is following the 12th expedition, and I think it is comprised entirely of women. The atmosphere in here is super spooky. It's one where like you don't really know what's going on while you're reading it, but the eerie, unsettling nature of it is on point. I love sci-fi horror. For stabby, this could be interpreted in a variety of ways. It's just whatever stabby means to you. When I put it on the board, I had like thrillers in mind, because it was like spooky, cute, horror, and thriller was like the thought behind each space in this section. But there are other ways that you could interpret it, one of which is to read a grimdark fantasy like The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, or any book in the First Law series if you're following along with Catch Up Book Club. This is an adult grimdark fantasy that is truly miserable and it does have a lot of like gore. One of the characters is a torturer as well, which perfectly fits like the stabby prompt. Another way that you could interpret it is to read something like a thriller. I Have You by Caroline Kepnes, which we all know is my favorite. This one is an adult thriller, or more like a psychological character study, I would say, where you are in the mind of a stalker called Joe who works at a bookstore, and one day a girl comes in and he becomes infatuated with her and starts to stalk her. And then the third recommendation I have for stabby is the Mindfuck series by S.T. Abbey, which, I mean, if you put that name together, is stabby, but also this is a serial killer romance. I don't know the plot. I think that the woman is the serial killer, and I think that the love interest is like an investigator that's trying to catch her potentially. But yeah, this would definitely fit as well. The train station on this side is Are We Out of the Woods Yet? So this is a book that is set in the woods of a forest, or like an isolated wilderness setting, or a book that has trees on the cover. So one that I believe is set in the woods is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This one is an adult fairy tale-esque fantasy about a wood where people keep going missing, and everybody who lives in this area relies on a wizard, but to get the wizard to help you, you have to pay a terrible price. And I think the main character does something like gives up 10 years of her life in his service to help her village. One that I don't know anything about this. The synopsis is very vague. I don't know if it's a horror or it's a thriller, but the title makes me believe that it's isolated and there are branches on the cover, and that is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. All of my friends really love this, I feel. I literally have no idea what it's about, but I feel like I'm going to enjoy it. And if you look, there are branches overlaying the moon there, but this is, it says that there's a murderer, a stolen child, revenge. So it would also fit for the There Is Nothing I Do Better Than Revenge prompt, which is good for me to know. And the book is about Ted, who lives with his daughter Lauren and his cat Olivia. So this one would also fit for the black cat prompt as well. But yeah, the synopsis is very vague, and also I feel intentionally misleading, so I don't really know what it's about, but I know that it would fit for a bunch of prompts on this board. And then the last one I have is a contemporary manga, which is my jam, weirdly, considering I mainly read fantasy or romance, and that is I Hear the Sunspot by Yuki Fumino, which, as you can see, has trees on the cover. And this one, I believe, is about a friendship between two boys, one of which I think is deaf. For the Stephen King prompt, this is to either read a Stephen King book, which I haven't read Stephen King, so I couldn't recommend recommend you any, but if that's the way you want to do this, then go for it. The other way to interpret this prompt is to read a book that has like a member of royalty as the main character. I guess you could read like a member of royalty's autobiography, because we know there's some of those out there right now. You could also read a book with a royal word in the title, or one that's like set at court. The first one that I have is a contemporary romance to share with you guys, because I feel like this prompt does lean more towards fantasy very easily, but you could do it a different way. And one of the different ways that you could do it is to read King of Wrath by Anna Huang, which has King in the title. I mean, bonus points for King and Stephen King. All I know is that it's a contemporary romance where a guy, a billionaire, is blackmailed into marrying a jewelry heiress. We also have, I had to throw one Sarah J Maas book in here, and it's A Court of Thorns and Roses. This does have lots of elements of royalty without them necessarily being royals. They're like high lords and stuff, but there are a lot of courts, and there's court in the title, and court is a royal word. And this one, of course, is a like new adult fantasy romance about a girl who accidentally kills a fairy and ends up having her life taken in place of the fairy that she killed, and she's dragged off to the land of the Fae where she has to live out the rest of her life. And then the last one I have, I know nothing about because I read the synopsis once in an unboxing video very recently, and everybody told me that they loved this book, which has bumped it right up my TBR, but I cannot remember the synopsis right now. And that is The Jazad Heir by Sarah Hashem. This one, I don't know whether it is adult, young adult, or new adult, but I've heard that it's amazing. And once again, heir is in the title, and I feel like when they have like heir in the title, they're also probably going to be set at court or have something to do with royalty as well. Next up we have Mary Shelley. So for this you could read a Mary Shelley book, and I have to say I do actually really like Frankenstein. It's one of the rare few classics that I do really like. But the other way of interpreting or fulfilling this prompt is to read a science fiction, because Mary Shelley is often credited with being the inventor of science fiction. So if you don't read sci-fi typically and you don't want to go full sci-fi, you can read a book with a sci-fi twist, and one that has that is Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is a contemporary romance about a woman who, I think she's visiting the town that she's from, and she accepts a lift home from her high school boyfriend, and this opens up two paths, like two parallel lives in her world. I'm assuming one where she gets back with him and one where she does not, or maybe one where she never broke up with him, but it's about like soulmates, and the sci-fi twist is the like parallel lives that you have going on in here. For another sci-fi horror, we have Feed by Myra Grand. This one is following, it's set in the US after a zombie apocalypse where the government is trying to get back on its feet, and it is about a couple of bloggers that are chosen to follow the most recent presidential campaign. The campaign ends up being sabotaged, and these bloggers kind of end up in the middle of it, fighting for their lives but also trying to get to the bottom of who is doing the sabotaging. So this one focuses mainly on the politics, but it is on the backdrop of a society that is trying to get back to normal with zombies also existing in the world. And one of my favorite sci-fi stories, this one's a space sci-fi. It's not Red Rising either. Red Rising is in here, but it's not for this prompt. That is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. This one is like a Romeo and Juliet set in space story. We're following a woman from a planet and a guy from a moon who, the planet and the moon are at war, and they fall in love and have a baby, and this will not do. Like, the governments of the planet and the moon need the baby to be gone because they can't have people know that the person that they're fighting doesn't have to be the enemy. So it is essentially this couple trying to raise a child and have like an almost normal life while also constantly running for their lives. And the final prompt on this side is Daphne du Maurier, and I gotta say one of my recommendations is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which does fulfill the alternative prompt, which is to read a gothic book, but also is by Daphne du Maurier. This is one of my favorite classics. It's about a young woman who falls in love with this really rich widow called Max de Winter, and they get married. They have a whirlwind romance on holiday. They get married and he takes her back to his home, Mandalay, which is haunted by the ghost of his ex-wife, Rebecca. You could cut the atmosphere in here with a knife. It is beautiful, it's eerie, it's haunting, and I love this book. So if you do fancy picking up a classic, it's a long one. There's a lot of description. It's kind of long-winded, but I adore it. So would recommend this. But if you want to go for something more modern, Mexican Gothic by by Sylvia Marino Garcia. This one has gothic in the title and is also a gothic story about a woman who, I think she writes to her, wait a minute, is this the hacienda that I'm describing to you? It isn't, it is the right book. So this one is about a woman who receives a letter from her cousin that I think she says like her new husband's trying to kill her or something. So, or like the house is trying to kill her. So the woman goes to the house and what she finds there is not what she expects. Also though, The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas would also fit for this prompt. That is also gothic. And one that I'm also pretty sure is gothic is The Diary of Blood by S.D. Gibson, which is about one of Dracula's wives and it's sapphic. The next space on the board is a corner space, which is Dice Roll Roulette, which is once again one that I cannot help you with. So moving over to the reds, we have the Omen spaces. So the first Omen we have is Black Cat, and we want to stop him from crossing our path. And to do that, you have to read a book that has a cat on the cover, a cat features in the story, there's like a cat in the title. You can use like the cat family as well, so you could have leopard, tiger, etc. And I have 3 different ways to fulfill this one. So the first one is The Inheritance by Robin Hobb, who also writes under the name Megan Lindholm. This is a collection of short stories, some of which relate to the realm of the Eldling, some of which do not. I don't know, I couldn't even tell you if they're all fantastical, but this quite clearly has 2 cats on the cover. We then have The Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami, which I didn't even notice has an actual cat on the cover, but the cat in this one plays a very significant part in the plot. This would also work for Mary Shelley. It's a literary fiction, but it's one that's like all very bizarre and potentially has some sci-fi twists depending on how you interpret some of the events in here. But the catalyst for this book is that the main character's cat goes missing, and I think shortly after the cat goes missing, his wife leaves him. So the cat going missing is a catalyst for a whole host of events that happen throughout this book. And while I wouldn't say the cat is a character in the story, the cat is definitely a very pivotal part of the plot. And then we have Nevernight by J. Kristoff, which ironically does not have a cat on the, I mean, it does, there is a cat in the cover, but I think the cover of Dark Dawn, where this is a bird, the cover of Dark Dawn is a cat, but we have a not cat that is a very prominent character in this series. This one would also work for the Stabby prompt because it's grimdark and the main character is an assassin. As you can tell, it would also work for the Crows and Ravens prompt, which is coming up next because it has a bird on the cover. But this one is a grimdark fantasy about an assassin who is determined, she wants revenge actually, so this would be one that's also good for There Is Nothing I Do Better Than Revenge. I really need to reread this series, I love it so much. But this is about a girl called Mia who is trying to avenge the deaths of her parents that she witnessed as a child, and to do that she's trying to join this like legendary assassin school, and the first book predominantly follows her trials, like her classes as she goes through the school. This is the best assassin school story I've ever read. I love it. Next up we have Crows and Ravens. So this can be a book with a bird on the cover, a book with a type of bird in the title, or a book with feathers in the title, and I pretty much have one of each. I think I don't have a book with a bird on the cover actually, so we'll say that Nevernight fulfills that. But the first one I have has the word birds in the title, which is The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. This one is a sci-fi, so it would also work for Mary Shelley. I bought this purely on Aaron's recommendation, so I don't actually really know the plot, but I know that it transcends time. So it's a solitary ship captain unfettered from time, a mute child burdened with unimaginable power, and a millennia-old woman haunted by lifetimes of mistakes. And it's about connection across space and time, apparently. I also have House of Beating Wings by Olivia Wildenstein. This one has feathers on the cover, and also I guess the word wings would count as well, especially as some of the characters in here, one of the races are a race of crow people. But this one is about a half-fae woman who is told by an oracle that if she collects 6 iron crows that she will, or is it 5? Regardless, if she collects these iron crows and frees them, she will become the queen of all of the lands, which she takes to mean that she will marry the prince that she's in love with. So she goes along with this plan even though she has absolutely no idea what she's doing. And then the last recommendation I have for this prompt is The Butcher and the Wren by Elena Urquhart, which of course has Wren in the the title. This one is an adult thriller slash horror about a forensic pathologist who is trying to hunt down a serial killer, and the book flip-flops between the pathologist and the serial killer's perspective, the serial killer as he's hunting victims, so this will count for Stabby as well, and the forensic pathologist like as she's hunting him. The next Omen is Broken Mirrors, and we do not want that 7 years bad luck. So for this one you have to read a book that has like mirror in the title or series title, cracks on the cover, or a mirrored cover. So for one that has mirror in the series title, I have The Pomegranate Gate by Ariel Kaplan. This one is an adult fantasy that blends Spanish medieval history and Jewish folklore. Definitely would recommend this for fans of the Winter Night trilogy or City of Brass. I've read this recently and I've loved it. And the series title is called The Mirror Realm Cycle. This does also have birds on the cover, so it would be good for the Crows and Ravens prompt. And this does actually have a mirrored cover, because as you can see it is symmetrical if you put a mirror down, which is how, this is how we learned it in school, which is wild that I remember that, but if you put a mirror down the middle, the cover would appear the same because these are symmetrical. I assume that most people know what I mean when I say mirrored cover, but I'm glad that I have a different example of it, because the recommendation that I actually have in for an example of a mirrored cover is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. Now this isn't exactly mirrored, but as you can see you have a city here and a city there. So once again, like the illusion that the cover is given is that the city is reflected. And this one is an October release, so it would be perfect if you landed on this and this was one of your anticipated releases. And this one is Cassandra Clare's adult fantasy debut. It's high fantasy and one of the characters is the sword catcher or like bodyguard for a prince, and the other one is a physician that I think practices outlawed magic. And then I do also have a book that has cracks on the cover, which is All of Us Villains by Amanda Foody and Christine Lynn Herman. This is a duology and the sequel to this does also have cracks on the cover. This would also work for Jigsaw because this features a tournament and it is set in a ooky spooky town where the children in every generation or a couple of generations are put into this tournament ground and they fight to the death, and the one that wins all of the power for their family. This would probably fit for witches as well. It's almost like if the Death Eaters had a tournament to see who would win all of the power, is like a good way of describing this book. The next Taylor Swift train station is What a Ghostly Scene, and this is a book that has ghosts, features, or like is set in a haunted house, so I feel like Mexican Gothic would fit for this. Also a book that is maybe haunting or has some kind of haunting, and there are quite, I think Haunting Adeline by H.G. Carlton, is that a book? There you go, there's a bonus recommendation. The actual recommendations I have, the first one is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This one is set in a world of clairvoyance, and clairvoyants have the ability to communicate with the dead through a variety of ways. Our main character is a dystopian as well. It's set in like a futuristic London that has branched from like an alternate history, and it's so good. I love the complexity of this world. But we're following a clairvoyant, or a particularly rare type of clairvoyant called Paige, who is a dream walker. Clairvoyancy is illegal in this world, and one day she's captured and she thinks that she's going to be executed, but she's actually taken to this prison where she finds out the real reason why the government has made clairvoyancy illegal, and it like throws open the entire world. I also have House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This one is a YA fantasy and a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, and this one is about a girl who has, I'm assuming, 11 sisters, and 4 of them are now dead, with each death being more suspicious than the last. And every night the girls are sneaking out to attend balls and dances that the main character is highly suspicious of, when she starts to think that the deaths of her sisters may not have been an accident. And then my last recommendation for ghosts is A Blast from the Past, and that is the Mediator series by Meg Cabot, which is an old school one of my favorite series when I was a teenager. I really want to reread it, but it is a YA paranormal romance about a girl who, I can't remember what the setup of it is. I think there's like some sort of mystery element in each individual book, but throughout it all there is a ghost called Jessie, and I think she's a medium and she's trying to get to the bottom of why Jessie is hanging around and like he won't move on. And like I said, it is a romance. The next section are the spooky season snacks, the first of which is a toffee apple, and this is a sticky book. And a sticky book is a book that you can't put down, that you think when you start you are going to keep coming back to it and you're not going to be able to tear yourself away. Now obviously this is a very subjective prompt because I don't know what books you find sticky, which it's weird that I've called it sticky now, and I wish that I could stop saying sticky, but I can't. I don't know which books you struggle to put down, so I thought that I would recommend 3 books that I have found compulsively readable. The first one is an author more than it's a book, and I've actually misplaced it. I definitely got it out, but I have no idea where I've put it. And that is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. Any Colleen Hoover book I find so addictive and so compelling, but my favorite one just happens to be It Ends With Us. So this one is an adult contemporary that reads like a romance but isn't a romance, and it is following a girl who grew up in a household where her father was abusing her mother, and as an adult her father has died and she's coming to terms with the loss of him and how she loved him but also like hated what he did to her mother, where she meets a guy who she agrees to have a one-night stand with, but it gets like interrupted and doesn't happen, so she thinks nothing of it, but when they meet again 6 months later it seems like fate is pulling them together. And then alongside this she discovers a box of her old diaries from when she's a teenager where she's reminiscing on a friendship that she had with a homeless boy called Atlas Corrigan. Colleen Hoover books are very addictive, wildly unrealistic and extremely dramatic, which keeps me turning pages, and that is why Colleen Hoover is a sticky author for me. I need to stop saying sticky. The next one I would say is a sticky series more than a sticky book, and that's Red Rising by Pierce Brown. We knew it was coming. This is also a mirrored cover, just saying, and it's a sci-fi, so it would fit for Mary Shelley. And if you have the original paperback cover of this, or any of the original covers actually, it has a wing on it, so it would fit for Crows and Ravens as well. But this, oh, it would also potentially fit for There Is Nothing I Do Better Than Revenge. So there's many ways, and it's a Becca rack for sure, so there's many ways that you could read Red Rising in October. But I would say that Red Rising itself is quite slow. I only actually warmed up to this book halfway through. I was kind of not really following it and not having a good time until I hit the halfway point. It does also have games, or like it has a tournament in it, so it would also fit for Jigsaw. But this one is a sci-fi that has a dystopian overarching plot. It's set in space and it reads like a martial fantasy. So while this first book I wouldn't necessarily say is sticky, the rest of the books, like when you get to the end of this, you'll get the bug and you'll just want to read the entire series back to back. Then the last one I have to recommend is one that I very recently read in one day, and the actual time it took me to read it was 3 to 4 hours, and that is The Edge of Collapse by Kyla Stone. Now, content warnings in here for, it alludes to sexual assault but it isn't described, but content warnings for like kidnap, torture, stalking and violence. This is a survival thriller that is set in a futuristic setting, very slightly though. It's only a couple of years in the future, where an EMP goes off and destroys like most of America's like entire like electric and computer grid. I don't know the technical terms for it, but this allows a woman who was kidnapped 5 years prior to the start of the story to escape the cage that she's being held in, and she heads off into the snowy wilderness to try and get free. And the guy that kidnapped her, once the EMP goes off, he returns to the place where he's holding this woman, realizes she's missing, and he starts to stalk her across the country. This one kept me turning pages. It was so compelling. Definitely wasn't the best book I ever read, but I really enjoyed it. I want to continue on with the series, and I flew through this first installment in no time. The next snack is Candy Corn, and that is a sweet book. So this is low stakes, all vibes, no end of the world stuff, no doom and gloom. It's just something that is sweet and cute and a good time. So I have 3 books to recommend for that. The first one is Nevermore by Jessica Townsend, which doesn't have a dust jacket, but this is a middle grade story about a girl called Morrigan Crow who is a cursed child, and this means that she's going to die on her 12th birthday. But as her birthday is approaching, she gets approached by a guy called Jupiter North who offers her a place in this school called the Wondrous Society. The only issue is that she has to complete like a series of trials to be allowed admission into the school. This is super heartwarming and gives me all of those like cute middle grade adventure story vibes, and I really love the atmosphere in here. Jessica Townsend makes it feel like Nevermore's a place you could actually visit if you could find like the gateway there. We also have one that I haven't read but I know is like the peak of cozy fantasy right now, which is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. Literally on the front of this it says high fantasy, low stakes, good company, and I think it's about an orc that opens a coffee shop. One of my favorite sweet reads is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, which is a contemporary graphic novel. It is a webcomic that is bound into physical installments, and this one is just the story of 2 boys who fall in love. One is out, one is not, and it is about their relationship. The one who isn't out, Nick, like discovering his sexuality and also like opening up to his friends and his family about that. It also deals with like some mental health issues, but overall the point of this is that the relationship itself is low stakes, and it's about these two boys just kind of like existing in the world around them and like dealing with teenage stuff, you know? So for pumpkin spice, I'm not going to recommend anything. The prompt is a spicy book, and you can read smut for this if you would like to. If you don't read smut, then the prompt is to read a book with something spicy, as in like something that excites you. So this could be like an anticipated release or a book that contains like your favorite trope, and I don't know what that is, so I can't recommend books based on that. After the corner, we then have the serial killer prompts. So these are our fictional movie bad guys. The first one being Jigsaw. And the prompt for Jigsaw is to read a book that features a game in some capacity. So this could be a real world game, like a video game, and like the Queen's Gambit, I think, is about chess, if that tickles your fancy. Or you could read any book that has like a competition or trials or a tournament in it. So the first recommendation I have for Jigsaw is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This is an extremely hyped new adult fantasy romance about a girl who is joining the Dragon Riders quadrant of a war college, and she has to complete a series of trials that include being chosen by a dragon so she can bond to a dragon, and training to become a dragon rider. This also has chronic illness representation in it, if that is something that you're interested in. For more of the real world, we have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This one is a literary fiction about two people who bond as children over their love of video games. They end up falling out, but they come together like a handful of years later when they're both in college and start working on video games together, and this is about their work in the video game industry. There ends up being 3 of them in total that this book follows across a couple of decades as they work on games. So it's about like the industry. It has some cool like stylistic stuff with the games, but it's also mainly like about the friendship between these characters. And then the last one I have for Jigsaw is The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. This one is about 6 people who are approached by a guy called Atlas Blakely and offered entry into the Alexandrian Society. However, only 5 of them will actually make it through into the society, and this book follows the 1-year period that they have where they're competing against each other. Now they are competing, so it counts for the prompt, but this is not a competition in the traditional sense because they don't know what the parameters are to be able to win entry into the society. They're just doing what they're doing and hoping that it will be enough. This will be good for spooky season as well because it's dark academia. The next of these serial killers is good old Hannibal Lecter, and we are trying to avoid becoming his next snack, and to do this you have to read books that have body parts in the title. The first recommendation I have for this is Daughter of the Blood by Anne Bishop. This is not one that I've read, but I know it is one of the series. Is it the Black Diamond or something? The Black Jewel series? Yeah, the Black Jewels trilogy. This is one of the series that heavily influenced Sarah J Maas, and it is about a girl who's supposed to be a queen more powerful than any other. I think that this would also count for the witches prompt as well, because I do feel like this does feature witches. The next one is Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron, which is the first book in the Last Witch Doctor series, I think. And this is about a girl who is born to a family of powerful witch doctors, and her magic isn't manifesting. So when something happens in the place that she lives, she trades her magic to be able to find like a child snatcher, I think. And the plot goes somewhere from there. Soul is questionable whether it's a body part, but I think that it would. I think we can count that. And then the last one that I have for this prompt is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I have to say this is not a book that I own, and so I cannot give you a synopsis. I think it's potentially like a literary or contemporary fiction that has some thriller elements in it, and I think it is about a woman who steals her, like it's a white woman who steals the work of her colleague and passes it off as her own. I think it's a critique of the publishing industry, and also like her race plays into that. And while I am not reading it and I don't own it, I know that it is very popular and it will be on a lot of your guys' TBRs, so I thought that I would recommend it. For Michael Myers, I'm not going to be recommending anything because the prompt for that is to read a sequel, and I obviously don't know what series you're in the middle of. However, if you have started the Red Rising series, I do recommend that you continue. But then the final prompt that I'm going to be recommending for today is There Is Nothing I Do Better Than Revenge, which is the last of the Taylor Swift train stations, and this one is to read a book with a revenge plot. Now I know that throughout this I have already given you tons of recommendations for this. This is like, when you encounter this prompt, you may not realize how many books truly have the like a revenge plot as a catalyst, but I feel like just doing this video and mentioning every revenge plot I found shows like how common it truly is. But I do have 3 other recommendations for this prompt. The first one is The Blood Trials by N.E. Davenport. This one is I want to say it's like a new adult sci-fi fantasy that has been compared a lot to Red Rising, and this is about a young woman who is grieving the murder of her grandfather. She was supposed to go into this training program to become, I suppose this will count for Jigsaw as well actually, and also Mary Shelley, but she was supposed to go into this training program to become this like elite warrior, and she decides to take the year out to mourn her grandfather until her grandfather's closest friend and advisor comes to her and says that he thinks that her grandfather was murdered and that the leading suspect is one of the trainers for this elite training program. So she ends up joining it with the intention of getting close to the murderer in order to get revenge for her grandfather's murder. We also have Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerry Maniscalco. This one is a young adult fantasy romance. The second and third books are new adult, and I know there is definitely romance in this series somewhere, but this one is about a young woman who accidentally summons a prince of death when she's trying to find out who is responsible for her twin sister's violent murder. And then the last one I have is I wanted to represent revenge in a different way than trying to kill the person who killed someone you love, which I feel is the most popular example of revenge in books. So I have Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This one is about a journalist whose career was ruined because he has a vendetta against a cult director, and during a TV interview he said something about this director that could not be proven. So the director called him out and said like, you can't prove that any of this is true, and it ended the journalist's career. So when the director's daughter is found murdered, the journalist comes out of hiding, out of his ruined career, to try and find out what happened to the director's daughter, but specifically he wants to find out, like he wants to prove that her father is responsible for the death so that he can redeem his career and tell everybody like, look, I was right about this guy. So he's essentially trying to get revenge on this guy for ruining his career. I really love this. This would count for witches as well, also potentially sci-fi a little bit, because like the Wind Up Bird Chronicle, it has some paranormally like unexplained elements that are potentially sci-fi or paranormal depending on how you interpret the text. And I actually kind of want to reread it. I found that the atmosphere in here was immaculate. The only issue I had with it is that I felt it was 50 pages too long and it should have wrapped itself up a little bit earlier than that, instead of carrying on and like ending on a speculative note. So there you had 60-ish recommendations for the majority of the spaces on the Bookopoly board. Just to round us out, we only have Big Book, highest rated, and most recent purchase that I didn't recommend for at the end there, all of which are of course dependent on your personal book collection. But I hope that this has helped, not necessarily in giving you specific books to read for the prompts, but what I mainly want to do with these videos is to illustrate different ways of interpretation of the prompts, because I might say something like, oh, this guy's trying to redeem his career, which might spark something in your mind or like remind you of a book that you hadn't thought about in the context of, you know, like a revenge plot maybe. Down in the comments, please let me know if you are participating in the Spookoplathon, and if you are continuing to struggle with prompts, I would recommend joining the Discord, because the Discord channels are all split by the types of prompt on the board, and there are sections in the Discord to ask for help or ideas or ask what other people are reading for certain prompts, so that you can also get some help and some ideas if that's something that you are struggling with. But aside from that, guys, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Kindle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.